Hello, and welcome to Cybersecurity Today. I'm your host, Jim Wiggins, and we're here to dive into the most important and recent updates in the field of computer security. For the next half hour, prepare for a dynamic show loaded with engaging discussions and the latest news in cybersecurity. If you've not seen our show before, let me spend a moment and tell you a little about it. Our show is a distinctive talk show and newscast hybrid that's crafted to appeal to a wide range of viewers, from the novices to the seasoned professionals in cybersecurity. If you're just starting out, we'll provide you with crucial knowledge and resources to try to learn how to protect your digital environments. And for our more advanced audiences, we'll deliver expert analysis and forward-looking perspectives from leading figures in the industry. So relax and enjoy as we embark on an enlightening and engaging journey through the world of cybersecurity. We hope that you enjoy today's show. Our first segment is titled Cyber Bites. In this portion, we'll dive deep into the latest news and happenings in the realm of cybersecurity, from significant data breaches to emerging threats. This first segment is essential for anyone looking to stay informed about the rapid changes in this dynamic field. We have a lot to discuss, and we're eager to bring these important updates to you. Don't go anywhere, stay with us. Then, joining us in our second segment is Mr. Ross Foard, an esteemed identity and access management professional with over 2 decades of experience, currently serving as a senior engineer at the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. His extensive background includes leadership in cryptography, data protection, and zero trust architecture. Today, he'll share his insights on identity and access management, evolutions, and best practices. Okay, so let's get into the cyber bites and talk about what's going on today in the cybersecurity industry. In current news, the Open Source Security Foundation, OpenSSF, as well as the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency and the Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Directorate have collaborated on a new open source initiative named Protobomb. This project aims to enhance software supply chain security by enabling organizations to generate, read, and convert software bills of materials, sometimes known as SBOMs, into various standard formats. Protobomb is designed to work with different SBOM standards seamlessly, making it easier for companies to manage software vulnerabilities and implement necessary security measures efficiently. This development represents a significant step towards mitigating risks associated with software vulnerabilities and improving transparency in software security practices. Those represent some of the most recent updates today in cybersecurity. After a brief intermission, we'll return with Mr. Ross Foard to discuss identity and access management, evolutions, and best practices. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. We'll see you after the break.
Losing weight's a lot harder than gaining it, but with every step, I lower my risk for type 2 diabetes and heart disease, and that makes every step very much worth the effort.
Learn how you can help stop diabetes. Visit checkupamerica.org or call 1-800-DIABETES.
Welcome back to Cybersecurity Today. Now we have the pleasure of welcoming Mr. Ross Foard, a recognized authority in identity and access management and a seasoned cybersecurity professional. With his deep-rooted expertise in IT governance and cybersecurity, especially within the public sector, Mr. Foard has been instrumental in developing and implementing robust security protocols for DHS's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Today, he'll enlighten us on identity and access management, evolutions, and best practices, focusing on how organizations can utilize IAM strategies to defend against digital threats and maintain effective security governance. Mr. Foard is widely recognized as a subject matter expert in this critical area of cybersecurity. Ross, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's really great to be here. I appreciate you inviting me.
Absolutely, absolutely. I thought that maybe we could ask, could you maybe start off with providing kind of an overview of what IAM represents and explain how it's become kind of a cornerstone in both cybersecurity in terms of strategy and both the public and the private sector? Could we start there?
Yeah, I think it's really easy to explain what identity and access management is if you think in the context of how you get a driver's license, right? So in order to get a driver's license, you have to present yourself to the DMV. You have to give some evidence of who you are. They're going to take a picture of you, and you're going to pass a test. And then when you get all that done, then they're going to give you a driver's license. It's very similar in digital identity world, right? Is that first we have to know who you are, and you're going to have to give some evidence of that. And maybe the driver's license is part of that, birth certificate, other evidence that you're going to present. And then we're going to bind that to a digital identity. So some authenticator, some form that later on when you show up and you don't have to go through that whole identity proofing process again, you can just show up with an authenticator and then you log into a system, right? And the final thing about that is, remember you had to have a driver's license that gives you the right to do some things. So just like that in your digital world, you're going to have the right to do some things, and it's going to be the policy that determines what you're able to do when you log in with that authenticator.
Understood, understood. I'm wondering if you could maybe speak to a moment about how this sector or how this area has kind of changed over the years. How has it evolved?
Well, it's actually evolved quite a bit. I was reflecting that it was a little over 50 years ago that passwords were introduced. So MIT built a system, and this was the first system that multiple people could log into. So MIT introduced passwords, right? So that they could differentiate between one person logging into a system and the other person to get the right information of those people. That stayed around for a really long time. And then in the late 90s, cryptographic forms started to be able to be used, and we introduced using the smart card in the federal government, and that has really been a very fortunate thing for us to do in the federal government. But that never translated outside the federal government space too much. So passwords remained quite prevalent in most other uses, and then we laid on top of that recently one-time PINs and SMS messages and those kind of things. But those have proven to be challenging, and that's where we're at today. We're evolving to reduce the risk and try to provide more cryptographic means for authentication in the identity space.
That makes a lot of sense. Can we talk a little bit about some of the standards that are used today within this space? Yeah. Are there frameworks? Are there standards bodies? How do they all play in that?
So there are standards, and even that smart card, it has a standard that is widely recognized across the world. It's an ISO standard. There are standards around role-based access control that NIST publishes, or NIST agrees with the INCITES, INCITS, which is a standards body. I think that standard is 359-204. It's a standard for role-based access control. There's standards around the cryptographic forms, and there's emerging technology that we'll talk more about from a group called the FIDO Alliance, and they're promoting some cryptographic forms of authentication that they have a standards body, and they adjudicate companies that deliver these FIDO authenticators as well.
So how do standards play in allowing organizations to kind of exchange information or protect their information? Can you speak to that for a minute? NIST is also a really strong body in helping promote standards in their technology use in the United States. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and they promote, I mentioned that earlier, they promote standards across the federal government. So what they do in many cases, and what they're doing right now in the identity space, is they're continually updating their guidance. They have a document, it's a special publication 863, and they're updating that document right now so they can incorporate some of these newer standards into their technology guidance so that we can adopt those technologies. It's an evolving space, so they have to really look hard, and their charge is tough, right? They have to make sure that not only are they trying to help people adopt the newer standards, but make sure those standards have the level of assurance that NIST needs to have, right, in order to be able to say, yeah, we should use this standard. Understood. You talked earlier about how it's kind of evolved differently in the government sector. Can you talk about maybe some divergence that's happened between the commercial space and the government sector? How do they look today? Are they completely different in those two different areas?
There was a fair amount of divergence, primarily around the smart card. That it was used a lot in the government sector, but not so much in the private sector.
Any idea why? I mean, what's the reason for that?
It's a relatively onerous process to go through in-person proofing and the kind of things you have to do to get a smart card. The government required a background investigation in order to get the level of assurance that they needed to with these smart cards. So that was not something that most of the industry was really interested in doing a lot of, and it was expensive, right? I think in fact, that's why the FIDO Alliance, the Facet Identity Online Alliance, was formed. They were formed to provide strong authentication that could be widely deployed and would operate fast on the network, right? One of the challenges, although it's less of a problem today, but 25 years ago, doing certificate-based authentication, which is what that card is based on, was relatively slow. The cards were not highly performant. The validation back to the certificate authority you have to do was not highly performant, and it was really just not considered to be, for people that are trying to do a lot of activity online, it wasn't considered to be the top thing to do.
Understood. Since we've talked now about having these kind of two sectors, what are the drivers in each of them that are ultimately pushing, this area forward?
Yeah, I think there's convergence in how we are getting our system services, right? So one of the things that was easy to do in the past when the government systems were in data centers that were government data centers, and they were different, deployed differently than private sector. But now we're moving to the cloud, right? And the cloud service providers, they provide essentially the same services, whether you're a government entity or a cloud or a private entity. And the cloud the services they provide, they try to make it the same in both. They will have some variation on the government. There's programs of certification for cloud services called FedRAMP that is differentiating, but ultimately, we're trying to get to where we're operating in the same way, whether you're in the government or whether you're in the private sector, because we all are facing the same challenges. The attackers are attacking both with aplomb, right? You know what I mean? They really are taking advantage of our weaknesses, whether it's a public sector or a private sector entity.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. I think you've kind of already answered part of my next question, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it anyways. Can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges? You talked about challenges and how FedRAMP and fits into it, but that organizations are, and maybe some additional challenges that organizations are running into when it comes to deployment of any of this IAM technologies. Any thoughts on that?
Some of the challenges are policy-based that federal government agencies have, is that we wrote a lot of policy based around the smart card, and although the government is trying to promote other types of policy, these other authenticators, a lot of agencies have really deep policy inside of their systems, which it's hard to change all those documents, right? But the other is technological, right? So there is barriers to these technologies are not as mature as the smart card technology, so actually deploying them is a bit of a challenge. You have to figure out, okay, what controls do we need to have for this? They operate a little differently, so how are we going to have compensating controls or things that are different than the smart card deployment? And those things are coming. I mean, I will say that the FIDO Alliance is working hard, not only with the federal government and government entities, but with the private sector, because there are, like I said, this is a convergence area, right? And financial services companies and healthcare companies, they want to have the same they want a high level of assurance as well as the federal government, right? So they're all working to have enterprise standards as well as commercial standards, right, for adopting these technologies.
Understood. You talked about passwords earlier and some of the historical aspects of passwords. I know that a lot of the systems today integrate with a lot of cryptography. And for our viewers that might not know what that is, we're dealing predominantly with encryption. Can you talk for a moment a little bit about how cryptography and encryption fit into this whole ecosystem that we're discussing?
Yeah, so cryptography is a hard thing to talk about, but I'll give a simple example, right? So Jim, if you and I want to exchange some information with each other, and you have a cryptographic asymmetric cryptography, they call it, you'll have a public and private key pair. I'll have a public and private key pair, right? We both have this, right? The public key is exactly what I said, it's public. You can share it publicly without risk. The private key, you're going to maintain secure. You're going to make sure that nobody except you has access to that private key. I will, if I'm going to send you some information that's encrypted, I will send you the information encrypted with my public key. When you receive it, you'll be able to decrypt it with your private key. And there's also the same technology we use to make sure that you know who I sent it to you, because there's the same technology can allow you to identify who I am, and likewise I can identify who you are. So it's not only identity assurance, I know who you are, but it's also the ability to encrypt information in transit so only you can see it. That is the real benefit of public key cryptography.
Understood, understood. That's a great example. Thank you, I appreciate it. And we'll put a nice graphic up on the screen when we go through it, so that we can show the Alice and Bob example that you and I probably learned about when we learned about cryptography all those years ago.
Yep.
Hey, I'm curious about zero trust, right? It seems like in the government, at least, there's a big push towards zero trust. Some commercial organizations are looking at it as well. Can you talk about what zero trust is, and then how ICAM fits within the context of zero trust?
Yeah. I think the easiest way to explain zero trust is to talk about a few different really prime characteristics of zero trust, right? So the first one is never trust, always verify. So, we had a lot of implicit trust is what we called it in the network we did before. We would pass you through a firewall, maybe authenticate one place, but then pretty much once you're inside the perimeter, you were able to do many things, right? So it's implicit trust that you would do the right things once you're in that environment, right? So advancing beyond that, we'll talk about, so we want to explicitly verify the things you're going to do. And what that means is when you do make an access and you make an access request to a certain system, I'm going to make sure the authenticator is right, that you have some reason to access it, right? Whether it's a job you have or an attribute you carry, that is going to be an explicit verification of who you are and what you should be able to do. And then finally, the other part that people miss about zero trust a lot is we're going to be able to operate within a weak environment, right? So we assume there's a breach that could occur. And what we want to do is we want to react to that breach appropriately by raising our risk profile and actually segment the environment. I mentioned, you only get access to what you want to do. So we're going to use what they call micro-segmentation to make sure that you can't, if you do get into a situation where you can compromise some services, you're only going to compromise small services and not the entire ecosystem that you're accessing in.
Do you find that there are any misconceptions about the integration between zero trust and ICAM that people have, or that organizations, you kind of alluded to one already, but I don't know if there were additional ones that you might be able to talk a little bit about?
I think the biggest misconception about zero trust is that, it's not a product you can buy. It's not a simple solution to add in, right? The identity and access management part of zero trust is just one part of it. So I really think that my agency, CIS, has done a very good job of helping explain this journey we're on, because they talk about we have a document called the Zero Trust Maturity Model. And in that we explain 5 different pillars that make up a zero trust architecture and 2 underlying capability areas. Only one of those pillars is identity and access management. And I can give an example about how I look at the different parts of this identity, this zero trust architecture working together. So if you access a system, your identity is the first pillar you come in contact with, but that person is always using some device. So we should make sure the device is healthy and it actually belongs to that individual. Then you're going to be using a network to get access to the applications, and you have to go through the network to get to the applications or the workloads. And all of these things work together, but the ultimate goal of all of that is to get access to data. So all of these pillars are preparatory things before you get access to data, and the data should be given to the person based upon the role, maybe the time of day, and all these different conditions that you can do to make a context-based access control decision around, explicitly knowing that individual should have access to this information.
Understood, understood. Hey, Ross, I'm curious. I know you're tied into FICAM, which is a federal program. Can you talk a little bit about the FICAM and how it relates within this whole discussion of ICAM? I mean, it's basically an F added to ICAM, but I didn't know if you could speak to that for a minute.
Oh, I sure can. I mean, we're really fortunate in the government that the Federal Identity Credentialing and Access Management framework has been around for a long time, probably 15 or so years. The Federal CIO Council chartered the FICAM office. It's the GSA hosts that office in the Office of Government-Wide Policy. They are chairman along with two other agencies. So CISA happens to be a co-chair on the ICAM subcommittee, as well as another agency. We always have an agency at large, and at this time it's DOJ is also a co-chair. So what the FICAM office does is we produce documents, guidance for agencies to use about how to implement this architecture that we're talking about. And the site we publish this on is idmanagement.gov. It's a great site, has a lot of resources. I think the most recent document that we published is in regard to what I was just talking about these authenticators. There was a phishing-resistant authenticator playbook, and there are many playbooks, architecture guidance, playbooks. There's also, we mentioned PKI, so the Federal PKI Management Authority and guidance around that is published on the same site. So it really is a one-stop shop that people that are interested in federal ICAM can go to understand how the government looks at and what the guidance we give for how to implement federal ICAM across the federal enterprise.
Understood. I'm curious, next question deals specifically with kind of best practices. Are there things that you think that organizations should not ignore when they're considering and looking at ICAM solutions today?
I think I'll put that in the context of the first two things. You definitely need to do identity proofing. The federal government does that, but each organization needs to make sure they know who their people are. One of the things we talk about in the federal government is building an enterprise master user record, so that all of your employees and contractors are in one place. You can understand where they are, and then make sure they have a good phishing-resistant authenticator, right? But those are two legs. The last leg is really trying to adopt an authorization model that is appropriate for your organization. I mentioned RBAC, role-based access control, but there are many different models that you can do, and organizations differ quite a bit. So you really need to think about, what model you want to do in your organization, or even models, because it could be role-based for this system because it supports it, but I want to do something different like attribute-based for this other system over here. So it's really thinking strategically about the assets you have and the systems you have, and then when you buy products, make sure you're buying products that support that strategy.
Understood. I ask every guest that comes in this question. I want you to look into your crystal ball, right? And tell me what you think, what kind of emerging trends, technologies are going to significantly impact, in this particular case, how organizations go about protecting their assets. And maybe we can link it into the ICAM in some way. Any thoughts on that?
Sure. I mean, I think the zero trust architecture is the main mechanism we'll use to protect assets, right? In the ICAM realm, I think, like you said, identity proofing is going to be something that people do, and I think the way that you're going to be housing the identity that you have is going to change, right? So there are technologies that are emerging that are going to help individuals to be able to manage their identity on their own, right? So right now I have passwords all over the place, accounts in different systems. We're going to see that reduced, right? These FIDO credentials are going to allow us to log into different systems using the similar pattern, right? So you'll have a pass key that you'll be able to log into different services with, and I won't have to, each system will have a different pass key, I can use the same device to present those pass keys when I log in. So I won't have to create an account everywhere I go, right? I'll use the same device, the pass key for that login, right? I think the other thing that is in my crystal ball is that I think people are going to have better control of the information they want to share too. So there's a set of technologies that are being developed for the mobile devices called verifiable credentials. And say for instance, I go to work somewhere and they need to know that I have certification. If I have that certification in a verifiable credential, then I can present that to them. They don't have to, they can be assured that that is actually something that I own, and they can make risk-based decisions based upon the fact that I do have a certification that I may need, right? And I think the other thing is, and I mentioned this, is there's a lot of interest and evolution occurring in the authorization space. So as we build these zero trust architectures, we want to be much more granular in being able to make authorization decisions. And the technologies are evolving in that way. The National Institute of Standards has one of the labs they do is they call it National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. They have a lab in there that is looking at next generation access control. And this is exactly about being more granular in your ability to make access control decisions. And you know, I really appreciate this because they're always forward thinking about where we need to go.
Understood. Last question for you. If a viewer was interested in delving deeper into the area of identity and access management, where would you suggest they look?
I would start at identitymanagement.gov. And particularly if you are in the federal realm, a lot of people around this area are, right? Next, CISA has great resources, right? So not only does CISA publish resources, and CISA.gov/resources will take you to a place you can search, but not only does CISA publish information for the federal government, but state, local, and tribal organizations, and industry at large, particularly critical infrastructure industries, right? We publish things that are general and things that are specific for different industries, so that's a really great source. NSA and CISA, through the Enduring Security Framework, also publish information that is also in collaboration with many law enforcement agencies and sometimes international organizations, right? So those are really great things. And the defense.gov is where they publish that. And I think NIST, the last thing I want to mention is NIST has great guidelines and in fact, when we build our guidances, we really almost always rely on NIST to specify what are the details of those guidances, right? So those are great resources, and I hope people do take advantage of them.
Understood. Ross, we are out of time. We want to thank you for coming in and sharing your expertise in this particular space.
Thanks.
So that's going to conclude today's episode. We extend our heartfelt thanks to Mr. Ross Foard for his invaluable insights into identity and access management and best practices. We hope today's discussion has been enlightening and stimulating, offering fresh perspectives on effective cybersecurity strategies. To learn more about cybersecurity today and stay updated with our future episodes, please visit our website at www.cybersecuritytoday.org. Additionally, you can scan the QR code displayed at the bottom of your screen for quick and easy access to our show's website. Finally, we welcome your questions or comments via email at contactus@cybersecuritytoday.org. Feel free to reach out to us. We look forward to seeing you at our next broadcast. Thanks a lot for joining us. Stay safe, stay informed. Have a great day.